Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan joins us from his district office on Long Island. Welcome back, Senate Majority Leader. Happy fall.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. So I wanted to ask you about this idea of parity that I keep hearing about around the MTA funding. So does parity mean spending around $8 billion on upstate needs, the way the governor has said he would spend $8 billion on the MTA?
You know what, Susan? It's so interesting that you raised this point and this concept and this question, because it just means that, days have gone by. Because there was a time, not too long in the distant past, where we had a 5-year plan for roads, highways, and bridges, and for transit. And it was a 5-year plan. So fundamentally, the fact that it was a long-term plan was an inherently valuable tool. Second, for decades, certainly long before I came to the legislature, but even during my own time in the legislature, that there was parity, and there was equitability, and there was a recognition that we have very strong needs in all communities across the state of New York, not unlike, frankly, aid to education. If you parse it and you say, okay, do we have needs in the southern tier or in the North Country or out in western New York? Sure we do. And the same thing extends for things like roads, highways, and bridges. I have obviously, long before I became leader, but now as leader, done a tremendous amount of traveling around the state. We have a big, and I repeat, a big, beautiful state. So that means we have a lot of roads, we have a lot of highways, we have a lot of bridges.
The need is obvious, absolutely.
Yeah, and the acuity of it is demonstrated, frankly, by the professionalism of DOT. You look at issues at the federal level, there are a myriad of factors that affect communities all across the state of New York. So while we fight issues like congestion in my home communities, you have issues like sparsity and distance between homes and communities in upstate New York. So we had a good process, and frankly, I want to return to that. So if we're going to talk about the MTA, our conference is on board with that because it's an economic engine for the city of New York and the outlying metropolitan region. But we're not having the discussion unless it is all-encompassing.
And so what I'm hearing is that you are talking about $8 billion for upstate. That's what parity means to you.
You know what? Without drilling down on the number, I think the most important thing is, how do we come up with the money? How do we come to an agreement? And how do we do something that is arguably in the category of the quote-unquote memorandum of understanding? How do you come up with a plan where everyone can say, all right, this is working the right way, and it is, by and large, in the best interest of the various communities?
The question you just asked, where will all this money come from, is sort of a burning question in here at the Capitol. You and the governor have both said no new taxes, so does this mean borrowing?
I in my estimation, we should be focusing overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, on pay-as-you-go. And I recognize that people will have issues with that, but the reality is that we have a lot of indebtedness, we have a lot of bonded indebtedness, we have a lot of long-term debt, and that has a negative effect on the state's long-term future. So to me, what we should be doing is creating an economic structure, fostering economic development, helping to stimulate economic growth in all communities across the state of New York that creates jobs. We create jobs, we create revenue. Revenue, we have a lot better ability and a lot keener ability to properly fund all the things that you and I are talking about. Bonding or borrowing should be anathema to anyone. Taxes should be even worse.
We have $53 billion in outstanding state-supported debt, and we're reaching the limit of our borrowing capacity. And also, more than 70% of the revenue in the dedicated highway, bridge, and trust fund is already being used to pay debt. So debt is a problem, but where do you get the money if we're going to pay as we go? We've already used up all of the windfall money.
I'm going to go back, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but at some point early in my life, earlier in my career, I got my degree in economics. And
I didn't know that.
Well, that's okay. But my basic point is, if we have a framework and a structure, and we have an environment in which people are willing to invest, whether it's in any community across the state of New York, I would love to entice people to come back to New York or bring other people from other states and say, we have a regulatory framework, We're not as burdensome as we used to be. We have an expedited permitting process, and we are creating an environment where the discussion is about lowering taxes, whether it's on manufacturing or energy or corporate taxes or individual taxes.
But why would anyone come back if our infrastructure is failing? Our roads, our bridges, our water mains are bursting all over the place. I mean, that's not an atmosphere that's conducive for economic growth.
I'm going to disagree and say I think that's an oversimplification. I think there are so many wonderful things in the state of New York. I'll give you a perfect example. I had the opportunity to be in Senator Serino's district yesterday, who, by the way, is doing a fabulous job. We toured all over her communities. We were on a walkway on the Hudson, which generates 500,000 visitors a year. It's a 212-foot bridge, 1.28-mile spread. It is a catalyst for tourism, and those are things that we should be talking about. And those are infrastructure is investments, whether it's East Side Access or, roads, highways, and bridges outside of the city of New York.
It's a beautiful place. Agreed. But there was other news that came out of the Hudson Valley yesterday, too. Gannett reported that Global Foundries is expecting layoffs and that Global inherited IBM's promise to protect the 3,100 jobs that basically the state helped them create through 2016. So it's almost like, sure, it's a beautiful place, the Hudson Valley, but we have invested in these public-private partnerships for these jobs, and it doesn't seem like people are sticking around, even with the beauty of the place.
I hate doing this, but I'm just going to disagree again. You're talking about 2016, and we actually had a discussion yesterday about Global Foundries, and again, the public-private partnerships with entities like the Dyson Foundation and a lot of other local philanthropies, they're doing incredible work. Walkway on the Hudson and all the people down there. But Global Foundries, I don't, and I'm going to take the liberty of speaking for the governor. I don't think the governor has any intention of letting Global Foundries go by the boards. And we spoke yesterday with Marcus Molinaro, the county executive down there. There are serious issues, no question about it, but there's, in my estimation, we have every opportunity to make sure that a company like that stays here and looks to grow their business. Am I saying it's going to be easy? No, but it's New York. There's not too many things that are just inherently easy.
Regardless of the final number, the amount of money that you would like to spend on upstate parity when it comes to infrastructure spending, is this something that voters will vote on if it is borrowed?
I would say a couple of things. Let me just parenthetically add some of the key players that are involved here. You have Senator DeFrancisco, who was chair of the Finance Committee, who is now the Deputy Majority Leader. You have Joe Roback, who does yeoman-like work in the area of transportation as chair of that committee. So we're going to have a number of our colleagues who are going to be very outspoken on these issues. We have a deliberative budget process during which we will have all of these discussions. Bonded indebtedness at this juncture, off the cuff, it seems to me that it would probably be unlikely that it would go to the voters. But that's why we have at least 12 days of public hearings. That's why we have conference committees. That's why we asked the executive to come up with a blueprint for his executive budget proposal earlier than we used to. Mm-hmm. All of those things are a component or components of a deliberative process that I think has some inherent value. If people come in and they say, look, the advocates come in and say, do some of this because it's valuable to bond money for this function, or you have people on the other side, taxpayers, saying this is not the way to go. At the end of the day, we're going to have to make a collective decision in terms of what's the best public policy.
Let's move on to education. Senate Majority Leader Flanagan, as of this morning, according to State Ed, there are 19 approved teacher evaluation plans and 48 teacher evaluation plans under review for approval. The districts have until mid-November, as you know, to get them approved, but that's fewer than 1/10 of the districts. Are you concerned at all?
Sure. I think anyone who's involved in this process and having chaired the committee for 5 years, of course I have concerns. But I'm going to start from the most important premise. What are we doing for children in the state of New York? Do we have a system that works on behalf of kids? Not on behalf of adults, but rather about children and students. I'm confident that State Ed and the regents can find their way to make sure that they receive these applications, that they review them in a timely fashion, and ultimately we can come up with a series of plans that will pass muster with those departments. And do I have concerns? I'm going to repeat, yes, I do. But Senator Marcellino has stepped in and stepped up as the new chair of the Education Committee. He will be very aggressive in this area, as many of my colleagues are. And, Susan, I can tell you this is an area where between budget and the end of session, we had an immense input from our constituents. And my expectation is that there'll probably be some bumps in the road at the end of the day. All of these plans will get approved.
So the Governor's Common Core Task Force may make changes to these standards. So is it right that districts still have to submit teacher evaluations that are based on the Common Core when the core may change?
I think there's a couple of basic things. And again, I'm just going to repeat to be obvious, but to be consistent. This is about what are we doing on behalf of children, whether it's standards or evaluations or whatever the case may be. The task force, I think, is with an eye towards looking at what have we done, where do we start, where are we now, and where can we go.
You agree, though, that the task force should make substantive changes to the standards, not just ones that are linked to the rollout?
No, I would say that the task force, they have the opportunity and the wherewithal to make recommendations. I think at the end of the day,
that's what I mean, yeah.
What can and should happen is that you can have a lot of work that gets done at the Board of Regents level and SED, State Education Department, and if need be, which I think is probably unnecessary, you can have legislative intervention. But, I served on the Governor's Education Reform Commission, so I've seen this before, and I think we made a number of changes between the budget and the end of session that are really parent and student-centric. So those things
we're going to have to go, Senator, but I want to thank you very much for joining us.
All right, you have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.